The coldest city in the world is known as Yakutsk, Russia, and is located in the heart of one of the coldest regions on the planet, Siberia. The coldest temperature ever recorded in Yakutsk is negative 83.9 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 64.4 degrees Celsius. When the average temperatures sit well below zero for most of the year, the changes the residents of Yakutsk have to make to their everyday lives in order to survive is pretty remarkable. To start, Yakutsk was originally founded during the Russian conquest of the Siberian region in the 16th and 17th centuries. Siberia was important to have dominance over, mainly because the region proved as vital routes for fur trade and as a commerce route for the European to Asian countries. Siberia eventually became famous for their vast amounts of prisons where the Russian government would exile their worst citizens. These prisons were in the absolute middle of nowhere, as it was extremely hard to build a civilization in a climate that would barely rise above the freezing level. Yakutsk had some of these Siberian prisons for the exiles of Russia, but really started growing in popularity because of its location as an epicenter of fur trade throughout Eurasia. The extreme cold of Yakutsk provides a far different way of life than what most of us are used to. For example, the city of over 282,000 residents is built entirely on top of a permafrost layer where hundreds of meters deep of dirt is frozen year-round. The first rule to the far north is to not dig. All of the pipes, heating lines, roads, and any kind of building is built entirely above the ground. All of the buildings are constructed on stilts to prevent the buildings from shifting too much from the changing ice formations as the ice heats and cools. In the summer, the top layer of the permafrost will melt, turning the mixture of 40% water and 60% sand into oozing mud. The Soviets would sink pile support structures 30 feet down into the permafrost frozen soil that would act as hard granite. About 6 feet of soil defrosts in the summer, but scientists are worried that this could increase to 16 feet, making the pile support structures unsteady. The homes and buildings here in Yakutsk would likely start falling apart if temperatures warmed enough to where 16 feet of the permafrost layer de-thawed in the summer months. In addition to the infrastructure of Yakutsk in potential danger, driving to and from places around Yakutsk is also extremely dangerous. Many car owners will leave their engines on for the entirety of the winter, as if you turn your engine off in such cold temperatures, it is not likely that the engine will be able to turn back on. In addition, the oil and gasoline inside the car would freeze if it is not in constant use to power the car. Some residents just choose to forego their cars for the wintertime, knowing that they won't be able to turn them back on until June when the temperatures finally get warm enough. Given that many of the automobiles in Yakutsk are constantly running for months at a time, Yakutsk is constantly immersed in a thick layer of smog from all of the pollution. Air pollution is so bad in Yakutsk that black skies have become the norm. In addition to the cars being on year-round, what is really driving the terrible pollution is the Soviet-era factories and the coal-fired power plants that provide energy and heat to the homes of Yakutsk. Traveling outside of Yakutsk into the nearby forests is extremely dangerous for most of the year. If your car happens to break down, there isn't any cellular service in most of Siberia, and it is normally too cold to even use a phone to call for help in the first place. If not prepared properly, it is likely humans will be susceptible to hypothermia and unfortunately freezing to death before receiving help out in the Siberian wilderness. One layer of protection that cars in Yakutsk provide is 2 different windows. The inner window is meant to keep the heat inside the car, where the outer windshield is built to keep the cold air out. On a bit lighter of a note, another unique difference in Yakutsk from typical civilizations is that the residents cannot wear glasses in the wintertime, as the metal frames of the glasses will stick to any exposed skin. Frostbite has been known to set in as quick as 2 minutes to any exposed skin in the dead of the winter in Yakutsk. Frostbite is extremely common even when you believe you are preparing for the weather, given how cold this city truly is. On the left is the average monthly temperature of Yakutsk in Fahrenheit, and on the right is the average monthly temperatures in Celsius. As you can see, January is the coldest month on average, where the daily high is -32 Fahrenheit or -35 Celsius, and the average low at night is -43 Fahrenheit or -41 Celsius. At these temperatures, the outdoors act as a perfect refrigeration system. Residents often hang their food that needs to stay frozen out of their windows, as your typical household freezers hover around 0 degrees Fahrenheit or -18 Celsius, while Yakutsk is much colder than that for most of the year. One of Yakutsk's major economic treasures is their fish market, and is one of their only markets since the climate doesn't allow for much vegetation to grow. Fish are sold in outdoor markets in the form of popsicles that are bought by the locals, who will bring them home and cook them until they finally de-thaw. The majority of fish are caught in the nearby Lena River, which is fully frozen for roughly 7 months out of the year. During the time the river is frozen, the locals will ice fish in the brutally cold weather, but this is one of the only ways many families end up being able to provide for themselves. The animals in the Yakutsk region look a little different than what our eyes are normally used to. Horses and other mammals in the region have evolved to be able to withstand the Arctic-like climate. They are built low to the ground with very thick fur and are typically very stocky with enough fat to keep themselves warm in the coldest of temperatures. The less surface area exposed to the weather, the better for these horses and other mammals of the Siberian land. Other mammals of this region include the Siberian tiger, Siberian husky, leopards, lynxes, long-tailed gorals, and even polar bears. Climate change has certainly had an impact on these animals, however, especially the polar bear population. It is predicted that with rising temperatures and sea ice melting, the polar bears will be cornered into smaller habitats that will ultimately lead to their demise in many years down the road. One other problem with living on permafrost land is that the burial of dead bodies isn't always the easiest. In some regions where the land never thaws, graveyards are actually illegal, and bodies are required to be buried in the land where you can build a graveyard. In Yakutsk, they are determined to proceed with a typical burial process. It just ends up lasting 2 to 3 days. A big bonfire is lit where the body is going to be buried, and then coals are piled on. Hot coals are arranged around the area until there is a hole in the permafrost layer large enough to store a casket. Although Yakutsk is the coldest city in the world, an extremely small town about a 33-hour drive from Yakutsk called Oymyakon recorded the lowest temperature of all time at a place where people permanently live. The official lowest temperature recorded in Oymyakon was -96 Fahrenheit or -71 Celsius in 1924. This small town, where Oymyakon translates to unfrozen water, only has a population of roughly 462 residents and is quickly diminishing. Oymyakon, similar to Yakutsk, relies on its meat to survive, as no plants can grow in this type of climate. The grit and strength that the residents of both Yakutsk and Oymyakon embody to live in such extreme conditions is pretty remarkable. Anyways, if you guys learned something, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and you should click this video right here if you want to learn about why the northernmost town in the world exists.